Hello, everyone, and welcome to this week's episode of SharePoint TV. My name is Vlad Catrinescu. I will be your host for this show, and today we're really going to talk about a topic that I personally don't know much about, which is the government cloud. But that's why we have two awesome experts that we're going to introduce in just a bit. Remember that the goal of SharePoint TV is really to get all of your questions answered. So please use the chat. Please ask all of the questions that you have to our experts. But before we introduce them, let's play a quick promo video from our sponsor, Valo Intranet. Welcome back. Now, let's introduce our two experts for today on the government cloud. We have Adam Levithan as well as Patrick Curran. How are you guys doing?
Good, thanks.
Awesome. Just a bit for introductions for those that don't know you guys yet. Patrick, do you want to introduce yourself really quick?
Yeah, sure. Thanks, Vlad. I'm Patrick Curran, and I am the federal CTO for a consulting group out in the Washington, D.C. area called Planet Technologies. I've been working deploying cloud solutions like O365 in the government space since for quite a while now. I've been working in the government arena for over 10 years.
Awesome. Adam?
All right. So Adam Levithan. I'm a practice manager at Withum in our Microsoft division, focused on, like Vlad, deploying modern workplaces to organizations. I am in Washington, D.C. also. You see a trend here. Yes, we recognize that there's local and state governments also, and I worked with them too. Been working with SharePoint for almost 15 years now, and I started my career as a contractor for the National Institutes of Health, and I've worked for several different agencies since then, mainly as a subcontractor. And four-time MVP. Woo!
Awesome. Let me start off the bat with saying that as a Canadian, I know the government cloud, when we talk about the government cloud, it's US cloud only, right? First thing off, it's like, can like a Canadian entity have access to when we talk about government cloud or no?
So typically, we're talking about for the GCC is the U.S. government, right? So we can have consulting groups that do work with the U.S. government or hold U.S. government interests. They can have tenants within the GCC cloud, but that would be about it. They have a certain requirements that they have to meet to get a subscription.
Okay. And when we talk about those requirements, who has access to those GCC tenants? Is it, I know you guys are both in DC, so a lot of federal, but Adam also mentioned state, municipality. What are the requirements? Who's the audience for the GCC?
Well, I guess really where it starts is it needs to be a security requirement, right? Do they really have a valid reason for being in the GCC? Right, and that's usually determined by their security team. right? So typically, you'll find the state municipalities or even or city municipalities, state governments and federal governments, but they don't have to be there. I have a couple federal clients that are on the commercial tenant as well. So it really depends on the agency and or even the organization and what their requirements are to dictate which way they're going to lean for what cloud they're going to go into.
So actually, also, that's a really good point, Pat, is that you're using GCC as if it's one thing, Vlad, which I know but let's back up for a second. And then Pat had just said it too. So there are actually, even in the umbrella of government community cloud, there are 3 different distinct offerings that are 3 different distinct environments that have absolutely no connection to one another or to the commercial. Okay, Pat can probably say, well, there actually are some connections, but I know the Azure Active Directory is different as one of the main pieces. The Microsoft Graph is different. So in all essence, there are huge security boundaries. So you start with the GCC, which is the lowest level that you just heard Pat say. Government agencies don't even need to necessarily be there, state, local, and federal, but it automatically connects you at a baseline of compliance. And I always recommend people go to the Compliance Center because it's really awesome to be able to see all of the controls that Microsoft has already fulfilled. I used it just for education to actually be able to understand all those controls. Then there's a second level, which is weird because it's not called medium, it's actually called high, because it meets I believe, Pat, correct me if I'm wrong, because it meets the FedRAMP high standard, so I think that's why it's called high. And then there's a third one, which I'm not sure, let me look over my shoulder if I'm even supposed to talk about it, which is the DoD. And so, just as Pat had explained, each one is meeting higher and higher security regulations. Each one, you have to have more proof and justification that you should even be allowed in the environment. And I have no idea if Vlad's even allowed to see a DoD tenant, but that's just Vlad.
Probably not, to be honest. But yeah. Okay, awesome. And I think, Adam, you actually had a little slide deck prepared to kind of go over some of the basics while we get some questions in, and a bit of asterisks in there from what I heard.
Sure. I will share my screen. Hold on.
We'll get Lyman in the back to put us on the screen for all of you. I see it in your background right now, so I see it in there. But let's get it in bigger size on on the platform. There we go.
Is it working now? I can't see. I think I shared the right thing. Yes, I shared the right one. Okay. So actually, let's go back a second. Hold on. Sorry. Why is it presenting? Lyman, do you have that frozen? Because that's not what I'm presenting on either of my screens.
I have to say, you could have presented something worse. So, still.
That's true. Well, I can talk that. I opened up the slide. So I think we'll see what happens. That's so funny. Anyway, this slide is really interesting because it's the super high level of what is available. And we joked that the best part about this goes to the user who asked about licensing with the asterisks. All services are not necessarily available in all of the GCC clouds. Now, at a high level, certainly that we're talking about here, authoring, mail, sites, analytics, and security, a lot of the features are available. So it's not as distinguishable. But I think that I bring it up because that's one of the most common pains that everyone is experiencing. Pat, Pat, what do you think? How many questions do you get about the capabilities in each solution?
Well, it's when you're comparing things like the GCC moderate versus GCC high to commercial, then yes. And when, one of my favorite things to do is, at Ignite, when they show off their new toys, is to raise my hand and ask, when's that coming to the government? And it gets very quiet. So there definitely are differences between the environments. And it is a pretty common question of, hey, is this going to be there when I turn it on?
How long does it usually get? Because I know, like, from probably a main product point of view, like I see OneDrive, SharePoint, Teams, so I guess all of the products are there. It's just the features inside that not all of them have made it in those tenants yet, right? How long does it usually get for them to get from commercial to the first GCC?
Well, it all kind of depends on a couple of things, right? So they're all built on something, right? So if you look at OneDrive, it's all built on storage, right? And so in essence, as long as storage in Azure has been FedRAMP, then you have the ability to now host things like OneDrive in SharePoint Online, right? So there are other factors that need to be taken into consideration for that. So if it's a really complex service, it might take a while, but I'll say that over the years, Microsoft has gotten much better at pushing these things through from commercial all the way through GCC high at a quicker pace. Originally, it used to be kind of on demand. If you stomped your feet, enough, you might get it turned on in the government cloud. But they've definitely gotten a much better roadmap and pipeline for moving things from idea through commercial through the government tenants.
So while Adam is still figuring out Skype screen sharing here, I see one of my somebody that has been attending those SharePoint TVs for a while now prepared quite a few questions. So I'll start with the first one. I think during the Cortex show it was that Naomi Moneypenny said that there's 2 certifications per year to get stuff into FedRAMP. So one every 6 months. Is there any way to know kind of what's currently in the queue of being approved so government tenants can better plan features that are coming?
So there is a pipeline of things to be released. And they should be able to get that from their Microsoft rep. I don't remember the website off the top of my head, but those things are put out there for what's coming down the pike. Yeah, absolutely.
Okay,
so I think.
Sorry, Adam.
Yeah, I mean, I'm presenting tomorrow at the Ignite the Tour. Yeah, so I just dated this video. Oh well. And we asked the same questions, and unfortunately, the answer is, broadly, the Microsoft 365 roadmap. I think that's now what it's called, Pat, and I'm sure it'll be changed in the next 2 months or 3 months. No, I don't know what the URL is. I just Google that every time. I mean, Bing it.
Bing
On Edge, of course.
It looks like someone posted it. Thank you in the chat. So that was really, really cool. That's where they say that they've taken the government out, they put it back in, they separated the roadmap. That's where they put it in. And I don't know if those items are already approved or not. I've certainly seen things. I was not there for that comment. I'd be curious if that's for high only, compared to, if it was for DoD or high and certainly not for GCC. Because I've seen items roll out almost at identical time sets with the intelligent intranet, with SharePoint pages and those type of features. So, the unfortunate answer is it depends. And it depends, but based off of what Pat said, I always look at it as a security risk score, right? So if something is a change to a page and being able to approve it, or change the way the edit button is, there's no risk of SQL injection. There's no risk. We're not doing JavaScript on pages anymore. So that is something that can roll through the approvals really quickly. But then, if it's an item, I think someone had talked about being able to put connectors in. You're opening up attack vectors by allowing for custom connectors. So to be able to have those locked down that anyone can do anything is a really big deal. So those items take a lot more time. So there's not one answer, but that's why everything takes time.
Okay, so let me ask two questions. One of them serious, the other one not so much, but it's going to date the video a bit. Do you think some features, like you mentioned the connectors, which is a really good example outside of Office 365, opening up that attack vector, is it possible that those will actually never make it in the GCC-H and GCC-DOD?
Oh, absolutely. Yeah, if the risk is too high, they just won't ever turn them on. But, just to kind of take a swing back at what Adam was talking about times and moving things forward, right? With the recent contract win of Jedi, we're going to start seeing a lot more things pushed through the GCC-H way more quickly, right? So they've got contractual obligations that they're going to have to meet, and which means that these services that they've promised in the contract are going to have to get fulfilled. And so for these things to get fulfilled, you're going to start seeing a lot more parity between commercial and GCC-H sooner than later.
That's an awesome point. I asked it for some people at Microsoft, but none of them would, of course, answer directly. But you really said how before to get stuff in the government was you just have to stomp harder and then kind of get listened to. Now I guess they're going to have a $10 billion, was it $10 billion? Yes. $10 billion stomping. And that makes a big impact. So I really hope that a lot more features will get pushed faster.
Right, but you still bring up a good point. If there is a tool out there that is going to actively open up, an attack vector or increase your footprint for an attack, it's just not going to get pushed, right, until it's FedRAMP approved and everyone is deemed it safe.
Well, I think the key example of that is the lack of GUI for a lot of the administrative elements. The reason that is not there is because once you put the GUI on top, you're creating a layer that by definition is looking at multiple tenants at the same time, which is just a no-no. So that's why there's PowerShell only for a lot of different features as you go upstream, at least for my simplistic view.
So another question. Remember I said one serious, one funny. Do they look at the impact of not renewing a certificate when they push stuff through, or does that doesn't make part of the?
Well, so actually, probably the GCC and GCC-H tenants weren't affected because they're different environments than the certificate on the public one. So it's just us commercial people that were affected.
Okay, so that's actually. Do you know if they were affected or not for GCC?
I don't believe they were. All the GCC endpoints are completely different than the commercial endpoints for all that stuff. So their certificates are going to be different.
Okay, awesome. Did you manage to get that presentation going, Adam, or?
No, I mean I could do a little bit. I mean, I could just turn my screen, and if it's not backwards, is it backwards where you're looking at me? No, it's the right way. Hold on, I can put it up again. So that was just an introduction. Well, you guys saw that before. It's going to take a second to. There you go.
That's the funniest way. You see, we're in Skype commercial, and we're still doing screen sharing
Right.
in a funny way.
Hold on. This is a big slide, so there we go. So everybody, oh, now I have to move my head. Wait, which way do I move my head? I'll back out of this. So this is all the compliance levels. And
We can't hear you anymore, Adam. I think
you can't hear me because I backed away.
Yeah, your microphone is really directional.
All right, then forget it.
Yeah, we tried. We'll just have to talk and imagine the slides.
That's what you'll have to do. Yeah, I mean, we're on the slides. We're just the different compliance levels. So, oops, I have to be able to see it in my own. That's kind of helpful. Compliance levels for FedRAMP. Obviously, we talked about medium and high. HIPAA, the FIP standards, FDA standards, FERPA, DISA level 2, 4, and 5. CJIS, is that right? Oh, yeah, CJIS, IRS, ITAR ready. I love that ready because the organization has to be ITAR compliant. And then, at the different levels, there are the different items. And the next one was just showing the location of all of the different offerings, that there are also different dedicated data centers that are located.
So I was going to ask, is the GCC stuff in the same data centers and kind of separated, or it's actually completely separate buildings, completely like physically separated from one another and from commercial?
So the commercial and the GCC are separated out just from a requirement perspective, right? And even the GCC to GCC high, what they've done is, even from a staffing perspective, is that they've made the staffing requirements for the GCC high and pushed that down. So basically anybody can work on the GCC or the GCC high, and I believe also the commercial as well. So they've kind of, taken the high standards of what they need to meet GCC high requirements and have made everything else kind of match. But as far as segregation between commercial and GCC, that's definitely split out.
Okay, and I see you guys talk a lot about GCC high, and I just guess that GCC DoD is just completely another level up there where it's not the same people. It's like nothing we really know about. Yeah, okay. So it's like Fight Club.
Says enough.
Yeah.
It's there.
And I think, so, if people aren't familiar, access control is a huge item. So you're hitting on a big point of most of the security levels, and I would assume the Canadian security levels too. So not only are not only are we talking about data centers that are separate, but even accessing the servers themselves, there are rules and guidelines, and there are one-time passwords that are given to people to access the cage that lets you access the other cage that lets you access the tower that maybe the server's in. So there's a lot of different things that are above and beyond, and that's the joke. For you to do this in your data center compared to having it done for you in any environment that meets these standards, the cloud, I think, wins and lets you focus on other items than worrying about tracking all of that.
But it was certainly feasible before, because there was a private, I think there probably still is a private cloud that every government still has with other applications that they host stuff in. From a best practice perspective, how should government, like say clients or admins, prepare for features? Do you see them most of the time have like a QA commercial tenant or a QA tenant? If they're on GCC high, they have a GCC just to test stuff, or how does that work?
Well, so there's no one blanket answer for that one, unfortunately.
Of course.
Like I said, it depends on the agency and what they do. So typically, like for example, the Small Business Administration, right? So their goal was to take everything to the cloud. There's tons of information on SPA, right? Their goal was to shut down all their data centers and move everything into the cloud. And they determined that they didn't really need to put their stuff into a GCC tenant, that the security requirements and all the compliance requirements that are within the commercial cloud meet everything that they need from a government perspective, right? And if you take a look at the commercial cloud, right, and like Adam was saying, the ITAR and the CGIS and all the things that are deployed into it and all the security measures that have been put in, they've got stuff for Australia and Canada and all these other agencies throughout the world to make the commercial viable, where the GCC cloud is just literally what the federal government or the state and local governments need to be able to move and run within the GCC. So, the commercial cloud is just as tightly secured and monitored and watched as the government cloud is, and some agencies just find it easier to stay all in on the commercial side.
Yeah, and I think the only thing that you made me think of with that question, Vlad, is it's back to Pat, but is also, I know we're here for SharePoint TV, but it would be remiss not to talk about Azure. So
For sure, yeah, because actually, yeah, I have no idea about it. There's an Azure, I guess, a GCC Azure, a GCC Dynamics as well.
I don't know.
You don't know?
Yes, so there you have your all of the, like I said earlier, right? Your SharePoint Online, your Office 365, that all lives within Azure, right? As we all know, and if your Office 365 subscription is in a GCC tenant, then your backbone within Azure needs to be within that same tenant as well.
And I guess I was going to say they have infrastructure as a service and all of the other platform as a service there available as well, not only the backend.
Well, yeah, but you run into the same problems within Azure that you do within SharePoint Online or within Office 365. Going between the tenants, some of these features have been turned on because they've been FedRAMP improved, and some of them have not. So you're not going to find them in the GCC high yet.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Sorry I interrupted you, Adam, before.
No,
okay.
That's okay. I'm used to it.
Hey, I never do that. And what are the challenges? Because I guess I know, Patrick, I know you're really into federal, so I guess you do mostly government. Adam, I know you work in both commercial and federal. What are the biggest challenges you guys see for government admins going to those Ignite the Tour conferences or Ignite, seeing all those fancy features, and how do they manage it? Is it a struggle to keep up to date, or how does it work there?
Well, I think that the nice thing about the good and the bad about government is that they're usually a couple years behind the commercial side, just from an implementation standpoint. Just the paperwork that they've got to go through to turn on things like O365 or turn on Azure within their agency. So luckily, if it's the admins in that time, they can start getting ramped up for through training and a lot are self-taught on how to use these new tools that are coming their way over the next couple of years. So, if they've been doing this a while, they're used to going to an Ignite or a SharePoint conference and seeing the new tools that are coming out. But it also gives them a couple of years to prepare for deploying it into a federal agency, right? And that's not necessarily a bad thing when you look at some of the sizes of these agencies where you're going to have to come out with a deployment strategy for 200,000 users or 20,000 users or even 10,000 users. That's not an overnight kind of thing.
Yeah, and I think the one thing I would say typically is the first step when implementing. A lot of people are like, yes, I want to do that. A lot of IT departments are ready. There also are other systems, especially when talking about in the health realm, that just can't go to the cloud. So that there are a lot of conflicts. I remember working with a machine that probably to this day is still on Windows 98, and it's segregated from the network. Well, it's running a $500,000 piece of equipment to sequence DNA. So you literally can't use the DNA sequencer unless you're using the controller that's on Windows 98. So there's some challenges that is in manufacturing too, because I've worked on supply chain throughout organizations supporting DoD that have some of the same issues. But really, it's that first step. They get really close, and I still have lots of friends at the National Institutes of Health, and they're like, "Oh, I wish I could do that." I was like, "Well, you have OneDrive." And they're like, "Oh, I do?" Like, "Yeah, you do." "Oh, well, no one's told me about it." "Well, you do. So you can do all of those things." "Oh, and like, "Oh, we have SharePoint." "Oh, you do?" "Yeah, you do." But another thing with that, and I know just to bring it up, because actually at last year's Ignite, I was corrected. One of the biggest issues is how the single tenant supports an agency, an operating unit, correct me if I'm getting this wrong, Pat, an operating unit and all of its departments underneath it. So what do I mean by that? So National Institutes of Health, my easiest example, is in essence 27 different organizations. Guess what domain they use? NIH.gov. So if you want to control your Active Directory in the cloud, well, you only have one domain and you only have one role to have an admin user control all of that domain. Now, Microsoft actually has gone in, and I hope they've done it in other agencies, and they've helped them segregate it out with customizations. And I believe they're actually on the commercial cloud and not even on the GCC. But so those are real obstacles. Is what is the management when you're talking about a ginormous 40,000 person organization that runs as 27 different items, have almost 27 different IT teams on top of a centralized IT team. How do you manage that? And I know Pat has direct experience a lot of different agencies. So that's where it's different than commercial, because they'll just say, I'll have multiple tenants and I'll federate and it's fine, no problem. Much easier to deal with.
Are there any third-party tools there to actually, because I know I've heard about that struggle before as well, and I guess unless you go custom with the Microsoft 365 admin APIs and build your own custom admin centers to segregate it, or if not, I guess you cannot do a multi-geo inside the government and it's kind of each one use those admin center. That'd be fun.
Well, so I think to answer about third-party solutions is possibly, because it depends what you're trying to do. But remember, those solutions themselves
might
need
not
to be hosted. Yeah, well, or they need to be hosted in an environment. So there are organizations that provide a hosting platform that has been FedRAMPed, as an example, and then the tool inside of it has to make some changes to meet those regulations. So it depends on what you're trying to do, and it would need to be an Azure environment, or in a third-party suppliers environment, but it has to also meet those regulations, or it just can't be used. I think someone was saying, and I answered a little bit about debating whether to use Power Automate, and if there were limits in the GCC, do workflows get throttled? It's my understanding, especially in GCC, and someone made a comment later about high, that there might be some throttling, but of course, if you get into thousands and thousands of workflows running at the same time, Microsoft's going to throttle you no matter where. But I'm not aware that there are any specific differences, except for the size of the cloud, of throttling between the different environments. Pat, do you know if there's any specific? Well, they're not going to tell us anyway, are they?
No, but that's just one of those standards. They start off with the taking the commercial standard and moving it across into the GCC, and unless somebody stomps their foot and screams and shouts, they're not going to change the throttling.
Right. And I think that the difference security-wise is more how many sessions. So where something might happen in those Power Automate flows. By the way, you can still call them flows, even though you use Power Automate to create a flow. So if a single user is running those flows, that might be where you could get bogged down, because the regulation will say, well, Pat can't run, 2, 5, 12 workflows at the same time. I'm not 100% sure, but that might be where you could run into some issues, but it's security, not throughput throttling.
Awesome. A question that we actually had at the beginning by my friend Jeff, and kind of you guys had the answer to everything so far. Let's see if you can answer this one. How is licensing different between what we know in commercial, which is kind of public, and government? Is it kind of the same thing, or it's a completely different world? I see Adam's looking at Patrick for this one.
I'm not a licensing expert, but as far as I know, it's almost identical. The license stack that you have on the commercial side is also available on the government. It just rolls out a little bit later, right? So they don't deploy it all at the same time, right? But as soon as the features from the commercial side are on the government side to enable that extra license, then they usually turn it on pretty quick.
Yeah, I think that's going back to the asterisks in the beginning. That's the frustration. So there are, if you've heard Enterprise 1, Enterprise 3, Enterprise 5, there's the equivalent G1, G3, G5, and for all instances, the major services are the same. I shrugged my shoulder on Dynamics. That might have been a service that wasn't available, in GCC at a point in time, and now is, as it's been fully integrated. And that might have been specifically listed in the license difference. But one of the frustrations is it's basically, let's put a different letter in front of it and pay a certain amount, but then you might not have the same exact feature parity, even though it sounds like it's pretty close. So licensing is on a grand scale in most things. One of the major items across all licensing is you've all probably gotten frustrated with the change in the term between Office 365 and Microsoft 365. What started as a marketing name really now is a package. And the package is being able to manage your Windows 10 devices, Office 365, and then get a higher level of enterprise mobility and security, EM&S, all in one license. I typically, like Pat, I'm not that big into licensing, but looking at the value, especially when our clients ask us for security, we push them to upgrade to the full Microsoft 365 because it just makes sense now. And it gets you don't have to worry about one of the things in the EM&S is a higher level Azure Active Directory. So instead of worrying about P1 or P3 or P5, because there are those, that's what we're all avoiding.
There's a P5?
I think so. Maybe it's just a P3. I don't even know. That's the problem.
There's a P3?
Yes, there's definitely a few great. But so you don't have to worry about that anymore because you can see list of features and get a lot of them in that package. Also, another thing just about licensing too and the cloud model. I mean, starting way back when with Power BI, that started at like $60 per user per month. Microsoft didn't want people to buy it, and then eventually it rolled into, reading it rolled into the main license. Things like there is a piece of threat protection that moved from the advanced licensing into the standard licensing because Microsoft saw the value and probably could scale it so that it didn't cost them too much money to run it. So I think that's the really interesting part that, the subscription, you do get more value, commercial or government, over time because they can streamline how those services are run and add the services to the baseline subscription. Did that, we'll have to get feedback. Did that come close, or is there a specific question that the person had about licensing?
Let's see, but meanwhile, I actually have two questions about Power Apps in the GCC. Maybe you guys know something about kind of any news about Power Apps integration in SharePoint GCC or Power Apps customized list forms.
So yeah, I'll take that question from Ted. Hey Ted, good to see you. I used to work with Ted, so it's nice to see him on here. So yeah, right now I've got a client, and as things get turned on, we're slowly testing them. So in the GCC-H, so I know that we've tested forms, we've tested Power Automate, things like that. I haven't personally tested Power Apps in the GCC-H, but it shows up in my waffle. So I'm going to assume it's up and running. Planners turned on. So all these things are in there, and they should be, I'm going to say, at least 50% functional at this point. But they're definitely there, and they're definitely making improvements.
And actually, I have the same experience, Pat, and I think the one thing that's missing is okay because of licensing, which is the connectors. So in some ways, GCC-H helps you not spend money and worry about the connectors into SQL or Azure.
You can't pay if you don't have them.
Exactly. So I believe, like you said, parity is almost there.
Okay. I think the question was really more into the Power Apps customized list forms that you can kind of customize the list form directly embedded inside SharePoint. They've been showing it for a year and a half now, I think. At least showing it off, not shipped. But I remember, I think Ignite 2018 that they showed it off for the first time. You guys have any news on that, or kind of talk to your rep?
No, the rep's not going to know. But the connectors, the custom connectors, right? And if you think about how GCC-H is supposed to work, right? I mean, that is supposed to be an isolated, environment in a glass bubble, right? So the ability to get connectors in and out of the GCC-H is not an easy task. So they're eventually going to, I'd assume, if they don't have them already, because like I said, I haven't played on the Power App side, should be able to get you a Power App that can talk to your own SharePoint Online subscription to play with the lists and things like that, Vlad.
So if you give me about 2 more seconds, I will confirm it. We've only been building full apps and not the SharePoint list ones, but just to clarify, in GCC, the lowest level, I do believe they're there. And then the question is if they've made their way, and I'm not sure if that's the question of the person in the chat, if it's high or just GCC, but I think they are actually at the
at least at the GCC level.
And I literally just logged in and going
testing
to
it out live.
Uh-huh. Well, and I can't share my screen, so it's safe to do that, right?
Yeah,
And by the
even
way,
if you
that
try, even if you
Yeah.
try, you can't share your screen.
yeah. And by the way, also this is a local environment, but a local government agency, but it is in the GCC environment.
I see we have about 12 minutes left. What other best practices would you guys want to share with government admins? Anything in particular that you guys want to cover? I know there's Ignite Tour DC, which I think you mentioned it, Adam, government focus coming up tomorrow?
Tomorrow, yeah.
tomorrow.
So it's sold out.
Sold out?
Yeah. So for a second to divert, I will take a step back. I do not see it available in the ribbon. So maybe I am not able to adjust the form.
Okay, so it's not it's parts of it are there, but not all of it yet.
Correct. Yep.
Okay, so at least we tried it. But yeah, so I don't see that one on the. Would that actually be on the Microsoft 365 roadmap or on the Dynamics roadmap?
It would
Since
be
it's a
on.
Power Apps feature.
I think it would be on Microsoft 365.
SharePoint integration with Power Automate 10. Oh, it's actually in development. Should come out in March.
Woohoo! There we go. Tag team.
It's the only item on the roadmap under Power Apps.
So best practice for me, I mean, it is the same as it's been. We've Pat and I both had lots of experience rolling out to organizations in the commercial world or agencies in the government world, and the adoption doesn't necessarily change per se. If you're talking about rolling out all of Microsoft's 365, I still love rolling out OneDrive first. And that's really a low-hanging fruit for both users and administrators. And now I'd have to check if it's available in GCC yet, but they're just rolling out a group policy that allows you to map that iDrive, H drive, whatever you call it, the personal drive from a network share to your OneDrive using what is now called PC folder backup, because known folder move wasn't a cool enough name.
No.
So I have to check if that's available at GCC, but that's great. And that just basically works in the back end. So you point drives and you say, just update this, please, and move them. And that, as you all know, just is huge about administrative burden of the backups and all that kind of stuff. But then also what it does is it's training users what to expect. Now, number one, as long as you're on Windows 10 from 2017, which, knock on wood, I hope we all are, you have files on demand. You don't actually even need to tell your users that it's changed. They will be able to use their file explorer exactly the same way they do now, and nothing will happen. They only get additional features in the browser, additional features of sharing, additional features of being able to access it if you allow it on any device at any time, because you can still restrict those things. So I love that as a first step, and they've made a lot of changes that the admin centers for SharePoint and OneDrive are co-located. So it makes it a lot easier on us on the back end. When you want to make a setting, you can do it once. And certainly, you can make those policies and settings around groups of people now. So that's if you think about who you want to do what. So it's, executives, you don't want to do anything. If it's scientists that do need to collaborate across agencies, or if it's internal administrative staff that just need to work internally, you can use those groups to set a lot of the policies and reduce your headache.
Awesome. Thank you, Adam. Patrick, any general best practices to add on top of that?
I'm a big fan of making sure you have your governance and roadmap, internal roadmap of how you're going to use it, kind of down and tested before doing a live production implementation. So, kind of get your governance plan, an idea on paper, and roll it out to a couple offices, and make sure your idea is going to work from a keeping everybody happy and organized perspective and secured perspective, and then slowly rolling things out. I mean, that's kind of my simplistic version of
It sounds like it sounds like there are a lot of stories in that, and my guess is you might share those stories when you're not being recorded at the SharePoint conference. What is it? You have a full day workshop? Is that after the session? That's probably when everybody can get the real stories, huh?
Yeah, I do have a workshop on Friday, navigating the government community cloud, kind of a deep dive into the GCC and GCC-H, so the high and the moderate. And I'm sure things might slip here and there about horror stories that I've had, migrating things out of one tenant into the next and then back into a different and stuff like that.
And I think there's also a full track, right? Not only a workshop, there's actually a full track on it.
Yeah, so this is the first time that the SharePoint conference is actually having a full track dedicated to the government, which is pretty fantastic. I know Adam's speaking on a topic, I think.
OneDrive, yep.
On OneDrive for government, and I've got a couple sessions as well. One for the kind of more of an introduction to Office 365 and the government in sovereign cloud. So, if we have any foreign visitors coming out, we'll talk about sovereign clouds like the German sovereign cloud, as well as the two GCCs. And then also a session on sharing and collaborating with external agencies within O365 itself, within Microsoft 365. So I think it's great that Microsoft and the SharePoint conference has dedicated an entire track just for the government. It's pretty fantastic.
And the interesting thing, I'm sure the horror stories actually go way back to how we introduced the whole thing about the asterisks. See, I pulled that back in just so to make Lyman smile. But in truth, right? So what you're saying, Pat, is what's written on paper and what you think will work may not work because the capability is not there or is not as fully functional as you think it is, or something of that nature. So you run into some of those rollout issues on top of just bad ideas. Let's whitelist this URL versus that one.
Well, yeah, and you bring up another good point, right? Of just because you can doesn't mean you should mentality, and a lot of the rules that we have with our own security teams for our own government agencies, they might not run in parallel with what Microsoft says we can do, right? Microsoft says we can do it. That doesn't necessarily mean we can, because if you break the security rule of your security team, you can find yourself in a lot of trouble. So that's another thing that you also have to be aware of.
Good point.
Awesome. Well, thank you, guys. I see a joke in the chat just before I finish. Not available in GCC High is Microsoft's favorite phrase.
Yes, it's not available yet.
It's not available yet.
It's on the roadmap.
Right.
I think a lot, and I think a lot of the government people can be optimistic now. We've talked about it with the kind of the Jedi contract that a lot of people will get. I mean, Microsoft should be able to push a lot more features faster because they will have to.
Yes.
Like you said, they will have to push them a lot faster in those.
Yeah, absolutely.
And actually, one last thing made me think of something is in Reston, they've stood up an entire Azure fast track team. So I mean, the services that are available, Microsoft is putting more and more effort to now. Obviously, it behooves them, but it's a customer service organization that is focused on moving people to the cloud. So that also should, on top of Pat's very good point about JEDI and multi-billions of dollars, internally they're putting the money there too to listen, and having that team request features will help us all out also.
Awesome. Well, thank you guys very much for taking the time to talk to us today. And I've personally learned a lot about the GCC. Like I said at the beginning, I was a bit clueless about it since I never have access to play with it. I now know to only talk about GCC and GCC High and never talk about the other one. But before we finish up and announce next week's experts and topic, don't forget to subscribe to SharePoint TV. There's a heart icon at the top right of your screen, so just click on it to subscribe. And let's take a look at a quick video about the SharePoint conference, at which, like we mentioned, there's going to be a full track on government, workshop on government cloud. So make sure to register, I think, before February 17th to get the best price available. And I think I was going to say some goodies, but I don't think government can get the goodies. So just to get the best price available.
Hello, everybody. I'm Bill Baer, Senior Product Manager in our SharePoint product group. The SharePoint conference is one of those events that's near and dear to my heart. Having been involved in SharePoint conferences or having attended SharePoint conferences since our first conference in 2006 in Bellevue, Washington, it's been an event that I always look forward to. The most exciting aspect of the SharePoint conference is really the community coming together. Your chance to come together with everybody that you know on social media, SharePoint experts from around the globe, every continent, hundreds of countries represented. It's just a great event to be at for community. SharePoint Conference is the largest and most comprehensive SharePoint and Microsoft 365 conference throughout the year. You have access to over 20 workshops, 200 plus sessions, 225 speakers from Microsoft and counting. So it's an event where you can really engage with the people that work on the products that you use every day, as well as celebrate with the community. The SharePoint Conference has something for everyone. Whether you're a seasoned developer, an IT professional, even a business user, you're sure to find something to help you learn at the SharePoint Conference. Whether you're using SharePoint, OneDrive, Microsoft Teams, Yammer, Microsoft Stream, and more, we're sure to have a session or at least a workshop that will address your needs. If there was one thing I would tell you about the SharePoint Conference, register today.
Welcome back, everyone. Now, before we talk about next week's guests, since a lot of you here in the SharePoint world just wanted to talk about this news that just came out today, a bit of restructuring at Microsoft. Jeff Teeper, which, as a lot of you know, is kind of the SharePoint godfather, will now also be taking over Microsoft Teams. So this is really exciting news. Personally, I really hope that the Teams team and the SharePoint team will now be able to work together a lot better and give us more awesome stuff. But now let's take a look at next week's guests. So next Wednesday, 10 a.m. Pacific, 1 p.m. Eastern, we're going to have Antonio Mayo as well as Joanne Klein come to talk to us about compliance, security, and a lot of other awesome things. Thank you very much, everyone, for joining us today. Remember to follow us on Twitch by clicking the heart icon at the top right, and I hope to see you next week.